It's 3:07 a.m., and you're staring at the ceiling. You didn't set an alarm. Nothing woke you. You were just asleep, and now you're not. And your brain is already running through a checklist of what's wrong with you. Stress, bad diet, too much screen time before bed. You reach for your phone, the light stings your eyes, and you lie there hoping sleep comes back before your alarm makes the decision for you. If this happens more than once a week, a doctor might call it a sleep disorder. You'd probably call it insomnia. But for most of human history, this exact moment, wide awake in the middle of the night, wasn't a malfunction. It was just what night felt like. In the early 1990s, a historian named Roger Eckhirk was digging through old English court records, hunting for something completely unrelated, when he kept running into a strange phrase. Someone would describe going to bed, then waking sometime after midnight, then going back to sleep again before dawn. Not as anything unusual, just a normal part of describing their evening, the way you might mention getting up to use the bathroom. Eckhirk spent the next 16 years chasing that phrase through diaries, medical texts, court depositions, and novels, and he found it everywhere. Homer, Chaucer, Cervantes. Ordinary letters between husbands and wives, doctors casually recommending remedies to be taken during it. He counted references to it well over 500 times. People weren't sleeping for one long stretch. They were sleeping in two. The pattern had names, first sleep and second sleep. You'd go to bed a couple of hours after dark, sleep for 3 or 4 hours, then wake up naturally somewhere around midnight or 1 in the morning. And then, instead of panicking about it the way you do, you'd just get up and live for a while. People prayed during that hour. They talked over the day with a spouse still lying beside them. They tended a dying fire, checked on animals, visited a neighbor whose window they could see was still lit. Some medical writers of the period specifically recommended that hour for conceiving children, on the theory that both partners were rested and calmer than they'd been at the end of a long day. Dream interpretation happened here too, since a dream fresh in your memory an hour after waking was considered more meaningful than one you'd try to recall the next morning. Then, after an hour or two of this quiet middle-of-the-night life, people went back to bed for second sleep and woke again around dawn. Nobody in these records explains what first sleep and second sleep are, and that's actually the strongest evidence that it was real. You don't explain something everyone already understands. Nobody today writes a letter defining what lunch is. The absence of explanation is what tells you this wasn't a special event. It was Tuesday. So what happened to it? The short answer is light. Cities started installing gas street lamps in the early 1800s, and for the first time, night stopped being empty, dangerous downtime, and started being something you could spend money in. Coffee houses stayed open later, streets stayed active later, factories ran on the clock instead of the sun, and clocks don't care when your body wants to sleep, they care when your shift starts. Then came electric light, and within a couple of generations, references to first sleep and second sleep simply stopped showing up in the historical record. By around the 1920s, the phrase is gone. Not because anyone decided to abolish it, because artificial light had quietly rewritten what a night was for, and a single dense block of sleep fit an industrial schedule in a way 2 separate sleeps never could. Here's where it gets interesting, because this isn't just a historical curiosity that vanished along with candlelight. In the early 1990s, a psychiatrist named Thomas Ware ran an experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health. He took a group of modern adults and put them somewhere with 14 hours of darkness a night, no artificial light allowed, for about a month straight. Within a few weeks, without anyone telling them to, their sleep split in two: a first sleep, a quiet waking period of an hour or more, then a second sleep. Blood tests during that awake window showed elevated prolactin, a hormone linked to calm, almost meditative alertness, similar to what's been measured in animals resting in a relaxed, vigilant state. Take away the artificial light, and the ancient pattern comes back on its own. That looks a lot like proof that segmented sleep isn't a cultural habit people picked up. It's a default setting our biology reverts to, one that modern light simply overrides. Except that's not the end of the story, because in 2015, a UCLA neuroscientist named Jerome Siegel set out to confirm exactly that, and got the opposite result. Siegel's team fitted sleep trackers on people from 3 societies that still live largely without electricity. the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of the Kalahari, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. Groups about as close to a pre-industrial baseline as researchers can still find. If segmented sleep really is humanity's ancestral default, this is where you'd expect to see it clearly. Instead, they found people falling asleep several hours after sunset and sleeping in one consolidated block until shortly before sunrise, averaging around 6.5 to 7 hours, with no regular midnight waking period at all. Sleep onset tracked with a drop in temperature, not with darkness. Almost none of them napped. In other words, the group living closest to how humans lived for most of our history showed almost no trace of the exact pattern Eckhart found written into hundreds of years of European records. So which one is it? Here's the honest answer. Nobody has fully reconciled these two findings, and that gap is more interesting than a clean answer would be. One possibility is that segmented sleep was never a universal human default at all, but a specific adaptation to specific conditions: cold climates, long winter nights, indoor shelter, candlelight cheap enough to use for an hour of quiet activity but not for staying up all evening. Strip those conditions away, put people back in the open air near a communal fire in a warm climate, and a single watched block of sleep might simply make more sense. Human sleep, in other words, may never have had one true ancestral form. It might just be remarkably good at rearranging itself around whatever conditions it's handed. Which brings you back to 3 a.m., staring at your ceiling. You're not broken, and you're probably not tapping into some deep ancestral rhythm either. You're a person sleeping in a temperature-controlled room, shielded from a sun you never see set, forcing an 8-hour block into a schedule built by a clock instead of a body. Somewhere in the last 200 years, we didn't just invent the light bulb. We ran an accidental experiment on every human sleep cycle on Earth, and most of us have been living inside the results without ever being told the study was happening.